Right, guys, so just another minute here, and then we can go ahead and jump right into things. So while we go ahead and wait, thank you guys for joining us for our final session in our exploration of tax use cases utilizing Alteryx. Today, we have a bit of a culmination of all of the different methodologies and functionalities that we've been covering, the various topics we've covered in the past few weeks. We're going to go ahead and sort of utilize all of them to satisfy or to provide a solution for a use case relating to creating and designing an output report within Alteryx. So we're not only going to be taking a look at ways that we can clean up our data, perhaps by using, for example, the parse tool, or combining our data sets, utilizing the join tools, as well as the general cleanup relating to our preparation tools, right? We'll also be taking a look at potentially a new tool set for you guys to be utilizing, which is going to be the reporting tools. Now, the reporting tools are going to be fantastic in that they're going to allow us to generate those beautiful PDF reports that you may want to show an executive level member of your company. For example, if they don't need to necessarily see their data sets in a fancy data visualization tool like Tableau or Click, or if you guys don't need to necessarily need to output it, you're looking for something a bit prettier than Excel, then you'll be able to use these reporting tools to be able to absolutely create and generate those beautiful reports here. So having said that, we'll go ahead and jump right into things here, taking a look at the data. Now, again, guys, if we do have some time at the very end, absolutely answer any questions that you guys might have, or if you guys have any questions as we're going through the Q&A, as we're going through the session, absolutely feel free to use the Q&A as well. Having said that, let's go ahead and jump right into things. So our three data sets here, as we can see, going to be a chunk of various files here. So if I go to that data folder containing all of the various data sets, right, notice that we have a bunch of E&P data. We have perhaps a bunch of different subscriptions. Subscriptions are going to contain our total sales values. And then we also are going to be joining that to some state tax rates to see essentially our total sales and the related tax values associated to those sales values. So we're going to be creating a sales and tax state tax report. And the output in general is going to look pretty similar to this. I won't necessarily say that it'll be entirely the same. Certain values might be a bit different, but that's okay. This is in general the output that we're looking for. So notice, excuse me, we have our Alteryx logo at the very top here. I mean, this is hosted by Data Meaning, right? We're going to be utilizing Alteryx, so we'll go ahead and add some fancy flair here at the very top right. We have a header here, and just for some extra added flair here, we have another header in the top left-hand corner, but also we have a dynamically generated text value here that we'll have to contend with here as we take a look at our data here. Now, having said that, the overall output itself, quite simplistic. We have the various states, the various 50 states here. We have the total state sales relating back to, again, those subscriptions that we saw earlier. We have our state tax rates. And then finally, we have our state taxes as well. So not only are we going to be looking at, right, how the percent of taxes that they owe, but rather the actual value of the taxes owed as well. So having said that, I'll go ahead and minimize that for now. We'll go ahead and see if we can't recreate that file here. So let me go ahead and zoom out a bit. And in general, for the first half of this section, I'll go ahead and move that third data set down. We're going to be primarily focused on not only our subscriptions data set, so again, containing those sales values, but also our zip code by states so that we can start to relate our subscriptions to the state values. Because if we take a look here, notice we do have a bunch of different information in our subscriptions, our customer related information. We also have our various addresses here as well. So I'll go ahead and start off keeping it simple with the first data sets that we have inside of our view. So the first things first, what we're actually going to do is we're going to convert this activation date as well as the expiration date. Currently, right now we see a bunch of nulls for expiration date, but you'll just have to take my word for it. There are values in the expiration date field. But we're going to be both converting these values. They currently have the same format to the format that Alteryx knows and loves, essentially converting these activation date text fields, what are considered text fields currently, to actual date fields. So let's take a look at how we can do that. Now, if I were to simply go ahead and click and drag my select fields here, or my select tool, and then attempt to convert that over, in certain circumstances that might actually work, but in a majority of circumstances, if you guys are using a format that's different and distinct from what Alteryx recognizes, what you'll actually get is a bunch of broken field values, a bunch of broken values here or rows in the activation date column, and that's just because Alteryx actually can't convert that field over. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to include an intermediary step here, an intermediary tool in the form of our parse tools. Now, this is a tool that a tool set we've seen in previous weeks here, but just to give you guys a quick rundown, in this case, we're going to be utilizing the datetime tool. And what the datetime tool allows us to do, we take a look at that beautiful description here. So the datetime tool is going to allow us to transform our date/time data to and from a variety of formats, including both expression-friendly and human-readable formats. So let's say that you guys have a data field that is already currently recognized as a date field, and you want to be able to format it into a text field to make it a bit more human readable. You can absolutely do that using the datetime tool. However, in our case, we do have the opposite, in which we have a more human readable output, a text field. So we're going to be converting it to an expression friendly field. Cool. So in order to do so, I'll go ahead and drag in the datetime tool, connecting up to the subscriptions tool. We're going to leave it to string to datetime format, again, because we do want to convert that string field to a date recognized field for expressions later down in the line. I'll go ahead and select the field, right? Subscription ID, not the best choice, right? We want to make sure that we're selecting the activation date field. We can go ahead and specify the column name. Keep it simple, activation dates. And then the options that we're going to be selecting going to be mm/dd/yyyy. Now it's very important, especially this is something that tripped me up very early on in the date conversion text identifier area here, is that whenever you're formatting your months, you do want to be very sure that you selected the uppercase MM if you're going to be selecting your months, or you spell out the word month. Reason being is because there's actually, in fact, another format that can be recognized using the text identifier M, which is going to be your minutes. And that's going to be your lowercase m. So if you were to essentially type in mm/dd/yyyy, right, you'd be formatting it such that it would be showing minutes, day, then year. That's not something you want to do. So we'll go ahead and select mm/dd/yyyy with the uppercase M's. Click on run. Click on the caret output, and it looks like we do absolutely have a beautifully expression-friendly output of our initial activation date. So in order to, if we were to take a look at this, right, activation date, the new one has our years, and then a dash, and then our month, and then our dash, and then our day. Whereas initially we were left with month/day/year. We're no longer presenting it that way. Looking at the new activation date, that's beautiful, and I'll go ahead and leave it as is. Now, we'll go ahead and do the same exact thing for our expiration dates. Again, guys, just believe me when I say this actually does have field just currently, because we're only taking a look at a slice of our data based off of the data preview. We don't see those values, but we do have values there. So we do want to make sure that we convert those as well. So instead of going back and dragging another datetime field and converting that up, right, make our lives easier, I'm just going to copy and paste this. So hitting Control-C, Control-V absolutely allows us to copy and paste just like you would in a regular Word document. Now the difference here is instead of selecting the activation dates, we will be selecting the expiration dates. And of course, we do want to make sure that we expiration date, if I can spell, there we go. expiration date, and we're going to go ahead and I shouldn't have clicked there. We should leave it as is, uppercase mm/dd/YYYY. Cool. So now if we go ahead and hit run, most likely we're not going to get anything out of this output, but that's okay, right? Because we can't necessarily convert a null into another field or field value. It's right. It's just going to be a null, but that's okay for now. We'll leave it as is. And now what we can do is consulting our preparation tool categories. We're going to drag in our select tool, and we're not going to necessarily be fiddling around with these date fields, right? Notice that Tableau or Alteryx has already converted our dates, our string fields, our parsed out fields. It's automatically set them to a date field, so we don't necessarily need to fiddle with them. However, I do want to make sure that I make this as straightforward as possible. I don't want to make this confusing at all. Ooh, we reduce the size of that. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll uncheck the old activation date and old expiration date fields, so that when the end user or end developer or whoever is maintaining this workflow sees this workflow, they understand that, oh yes, the activation date without a underscore, the original activation date, that's no longer correct, right? We do want to utilize this new activation date, and that's going to be represented by the fact that we're only allowing that field to go downstream. Now what I'll go ahead and do, this is more of a human readable thing. You guys absolutely do not need to do this whatsoever. Does not change the functionality at all. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to highlight these two fields. I'm going to also shift them up to in front of the old activation and expiration date, and that'll just make it a bit easier to read moving forward. So if you guys were expecting a specific outputs, right, you may want to adjust that. But again, that does not affect functionality whatsoever. Having said that, we are going to be taking a look at this tax states total sales report and tax report within the lens of just 2018 data. So in order to actually be able to look at that, right, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click on the filter field, and this is why it was super important for us to be able to convert that original expiration date to the new expiration date. Is if I want to be able to see expirations, or I guess you could say subscriptions that expire in 2018, what we're actually going to need to do is actually put a filter on it. Now, if you were to leave it just as a text field, you would have to input all 365 days worth of information to capture all that year. However, because we are utilizing a new date field, what I can actually do is just simply utilize the date functionality built into the basic filter. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll set this to less than or equal to a fixed date, and that fixed date is going to be, I can go all the way to January 2018. I'll select January 2018, or the 1st of January 2018, I should say. So let's go ahead and see what we get out of this. Excellent. Now this will bring back all of the values that are not expiring in January 2018. And then the true values are going to, as we can see beautifully, we get all those values that have already expired here. So we're going to put ourselves in the shoes of an individual who's looking at this data back in 2018, even though it's 2020. No worries, right? We're going to be taking a look at it from the lens of 2018 data, 2018 analyst, and we're going to be saying, I just want to look at the data of all of these subscriptions that are currently, let's say, active. Now, I'll go ahead, and in order to be able to actually find that expiration date here, let's say that's because these values are null. This is going to prevent us from being able to use some key, let's say, functionality. So instead of leaving it at null, what we can actually do is we can start to add in some extra functionality utilizing our formula tools. So let's say, for example, we want to swap these nulls out all to 2018 12/31. So if an expiration date is null here, then we're going to say it expires at the end of the year. So in order to do so, I'm going to add in a nifty formula tool here, connecting that up to, very important, the false output here. I'll add a column. Actually, we'll use the original expiration date column. And the formula that we're going to use here is, I'm going to cheat a bit, I'm going to copy and paste it, but don't worry, absolutely, we'll go ahead and take a look at what this is. So what we're doing here is we're recalling an if statement. We've seen this before in previous sections or sessions, but just one more time, right? If our expiration dates, right, our expiration date field, if that is null, so we're checking whether or not our expiration date field is null, which currently is the case, right? Then we're going to go ahead and replace that with the value 2018-12-31, which is, of course, at the end of our 2018 year. If it is not null, or I should say, if it isn't null, right, then we're going to apply our, we're just going to leave it as is. We're going to leave it as the current expiration date value. And then we, of course, just like any sentence, we do need to end that if statement with a period, or in this case, an end if. So to put into one big sentence, if our expiration date is true, or if our expiration date is null, then we will apply that new value of 2018-12-31. If it isn't null, then we're just gonna leave the date value there, and then we're gonna end it. We're not gonna be looking for any other conditions here. So we're just looking at two conditions: if it is null, if it isn't null. Now, I'll go ahead and add in some other extra added functionality. So this might be useful if you guys are going to be utilizing this outside this data set, outside of Alteryx. So I know I mentioned before, we're going to be inputting this into a PDF report, but I'm going to go ahead and show you guys some extra added flair here that you guys can add in to your Alteryx workflows, make it a bit easier to utilize. Sort of adding in, you can almost think of it as like an index. It's not really an index, but rather we're going to be pulling out our date values, or their date parts, into their own individual fields. So for example, we have a month slice, and we also have like a year slice, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll go ahead and show you guys how to pull that out. So what I'll go ahead and do here is add a column, activation date underscore month. And what this will allow us to do is this will allow us to pull out, if I go ahead and also switch this over to an integer 32, right? What this is going to allow us to do is if we take a look at this formula, right? We're looking at, again, an if statement. So if our activation date is less than 2018-01-01, then 1, else 2 numbers. So we're converting a number. What the number that we're converting is going to be our datetime format, and the datetime format that we're looking for is the %m identifier format, or in this case, the M format. Now it's a bit confusing because, whereas before in our datetime parse tool, right, it was an uppercase M. In this case, we're going to be utilizing a lowercase m, but that's just the quirk of the tool. We're just gonna have to identify that, and then we can move on from there. So we see a 1. So it says that the activation date is currently less than 2018-01. So if I go ahead and click on the plus, I will add a column here, and we'll call this expiration date underscore month. And we're just going to be doing the same exact thing, except for our expiration date. Now, because our expiration date already had that built-in sort of functionality here, we don't necessarily even need to add in an if statement. We can just say we're going to be converting that datetime format to a number, and the datetime format we're converting is going to be the expiration date %m. Now, of course, please do keep in mind that we've also converted these to int32 to numbers, whereas initially they are going to be set as v strings, or I guess I should say VW strings. Okie doke. Now, very important. What we're actually going to be doing now is we're going to be finding the summation of or I guess I should say, rather, the difference between the activation date month and the expiration date months to figure out how long an individual has been a member with us. So let's go ahead and type this in: membership underscore months 2018. Oh, 2018. Go ahead and paste that in there. So all we're doing here is we're saying expiration date month minus activation date month plus 1. So we're going to be saying that, for example, in this first row, right, we had an activation date month of 1, expiration date month of 12. So this user has been subscribed to us for over 12 months, or rather for 12 months in general. So I'll go ahead and convert this over to an int32. And we're nearing the end of this section of our workflow, right? We're gonna go ahead and pretty soon put a pin on our subscription part of the flow here before we start to join it up to our zip code by states. Don't worry, guys, this will all make sense if it hasn't already in just a couple of minutes here. So if I go ahead here and drag in the select tool, what we're gonna go ahead and do is we're going to clean up this workflow. So we don't necessarily need the activation dates month and expiration date months fields anymore. If you do want to add them in, again, if you're going to be implementing this workflow or this data set in a different tool, feel free to do so. However, in this case, because we're generating an output of a PDF, we're going to just leave it as is. Cool. All right, so what we can do now is I'm going to actually add in one last formula tool. Now, this is something that you could have absolutely done in a different part of the workflow, mainly this part, this formula tool parts. However, I just do want to provide some kind of I guess, container here just to show you guys that this is going to be a separate part of the workflow. The reason being is what we're actually going to be computing now. So we're going to be computing our total sales. So while this could have definitely been in the previous formula tool, I just want to let you guys know that this is going to be a marking point of where we're going to start to shift our focus here. So I'll go ahead and type in membership months. And because this is actually a subscription model data set, if you guys are working with your own subscription data, what you could actually do if you only have one tier, simply just type in that subscription data set here. So for example, for like magazine companies all have the same subscription amounts per month. You could absolutely type in that subscription value, and that was actually going to just show us our total sales here. So if I go ahead and switch this over to a double is like a decimal. However, it has a float slash decimal. So a double is a decimal. However, it'll allow us to have an increased size in terms of the numbers that we can represent. So notice that a double has a size of 8. If I go ahead and select float, as a size of 4, so it just represents the number of significant figures that we can consider while working with our values here. So having said that, I'll go ahead and click out, and we haven't run our workflow in a while. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're actually building towards. Key feature of Alteryx. So if I go ahead and click on that output caret there, let's see what we got. So we have 119.4, 99.5, 19.9. That's going to show us all of our various values there. So what we can go ahead and do now is now just start to join up our zip code by states lookup table to our now cleaned up total sales by membership output here. So if I go ahead and let's actually clean this up, let's make this a bit prettier. Some Alteryx best practices here for you guys. Clicking on join and dragging that into the view. Now what you'll notice is we have zip codes in one side of this data set, right? We have zip codes in our zip code by states. However, even though we have a billing zip, it is actually going to be null. That's okay. We'll actually go ahead and configure this up such that we can start to capture those null zip codes. Maybe perhaps someone purchased this this subscription on campus or on a website, and for whatever reason we're not able to see a billing zip. That's completely fine. We'll go ahead and manage that here. So if I go ahead and select billing zip, select that over and join that up to our zip code on the right side, it's absolutely going to beautifully give us our values here. So if I go ahead and also deselect our billing zip, don't need that anymore, and deselect also the name, the zip code, and county name fields. This will become apparent as to why we're doing this here in just a second. We go ahead and run this workflow and see what we get. So the right output is just going to show us all of the zip codes that did not join up with the first data set. And that's completely to be expected, right? Unless we're like a wide-reaching company that has significant presence in every single zip code, right? We may not have people who've purchased subscriptions in, for example, 00001 in Alaska, right? That might not even have people in that zip code. So it would make sense that in our joining process, if we're joining up to a table, a lookup table specifically that contains every single zip code values, that it would stand to reason that we would have some overflow on the right output here, or a right join. Now, on the flip side, we will actually have values that join up perfectly. And that's just going to be because we had zip codes, building zip codes that were relatable to a specific zip code in our lookup table. Now, on the other side, sort of going full circle now, we do have those building zip codes that were null. So either they purchased it on College Courses Now, sounds like a generic internet name, versus for example, sold coursestoyou.com. Maybe the first one didn't necessarily contain billing zip codes. They didn't necessarily need it. So we will have that disparity between the data sets. Maybe not everything is going to join up perfectly, but that's okay. We can absolutely consider this information a bit differently and be able to join it back up. And in order to do so, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and consider these just one chunk of data that we, for whatever reason, couldn't necessarily apply as billing zip code to. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and click on add, go to sum, the second option, I should say. And then we can go ahead and leave it as is. This is going to be sum of total sales. Now, what we'll go ahead and do here is we'll start to transform our data into a cross tab. So what we can do is if we go ahead and drag in our cross tabbed view, right? So we'll leave everything empty in our group data by these values. The column headers that we're going to be selecting are going to be the state name. And for the values in the first column, we're going to go ahead and or in the column, we're going to go ahead and utilize the total sales. Now, if we're going to be aggregating our values, which we are in this case, I want to specify the sum aggregation. So essentially what we're doing here is we're going to be bringing and readjusting our data such that we are now being presented with just a column for each state, and we're going to have one row associated with that. So I go ahead and click on run. Right, clicking on the output here, it looks like we do have Alabama, Alaska, et cetera, all of those wonderful countries, or not countries, states, and their values here. If I go ahead and click on select, cool. We can, there we go. Let's see here. So we didn't necessarily need to adjust that at all. Let's see if I can find our total here. So let's see here. May have also forgotten a method of aggregation. That's okay. We're actually going to go ahead and select the total column here as well. So what this will allow us to do is not only get those wonderful values here, it does now allow us to show us our total field here as well, our total column. Now, that unfortunately does affect our values here. So if I go ahead and drag in our preparation tool, select, what we can go ahead and do is we can absolutely rename these values here. So if I go ahead and select these, remove prefix, remove the sum. And what we can go ahead and do is we'll shift that down so we can have our total at the very top here. Cool. All righty then. So what we can now do is we can go ahead and click on our run, see what happens. Here, select tool. Beautiful. We have our totals, we have our Alabamas, and we have everything else. Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So for our key columns, what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is we'll drag in our summarize tool, or rather our transpose tool here. And we're now going to be, so what we've done initially is we've summed up everything. We've summarized all of our values. And now all we need to do is we need to select our key columns and our data columns. So our key columns are going to be the total field. So we're just going to be providing a total value. And in our data columns, we're going to be providing our field values for each state field here. So if I go ahead and click on run, let's see what we get. Beautiful. So we have our total here, our total subscriptions across the entire data set. Then we also have our names here as well for each state, and then the value. Now, you could have absolutely, just as a note here, you could have absolutely utilized some kind of combination of summarize and join tools. That's actually something that I've done in the past. We've tweaked it just to show you guys a different perspective of a different use case of Alteryx, right? I like to call Alteryx a sort of like a math equation, right? There's many ways to get to the same output in like, for example, a math problem. However, there isn't really one way that's better than another. We're just showing you multiple different methods of getting to that same conclusion. So having said that, we can go ahead and also add in our append tool, or our append fields tool. So now that we've actually gone ahead and added in both of our data sets here. So we have not only our summarize or transpose to, as well as our summarize tools showing us our sum of total sales, right? We can now start to join these back up and that's all fine and dandy for us. So I'll go ahead and add those in here. So what I'll go ahead and do is add in the append fields tool. We'll go ahead and connect that up to the source, right? And then connect up the transpose tool to our target here. So I'll go ahead and take a look. We can go ahead and do some renaming of values here. So I'll go ahead and rename this first to total known sales, states, known states, sales, and total unknown. Oh, if I can spell unknown sales. So what we have essentially is our total known sales, right? Those state values that had zip codes associated with them, the state field, our known state sales. And then we also have those total unknown sales, which perhaps for whatever reason it didn't have that billing zip code, right? That's coming to us from our summarize tool here. So I go ahead and click on run. Let's see what we get out from our append tool. Now, if you guys are thinking at home, this is a very, very odd way of constructing a data set. You're absolutely correct. The reason why we're actually building this data set out like this in this specific manner is because we're actually going to be outputting it into a PDF file, which likes to accept a specific output configuration or structure, you could say. So we'll go ahead and sort of talk about those nuances here in just a second as we get to them here. Now, I'll go ahead and add in another formula tool. We're just going to go through and enhance our data set a bit further. So we'll go ahead and call this let's call it apportions unknown sales. And that's just going to be our, let me go ahead and type that in again, apportioned state, unknown sales. All right, cool. Go ahead and type that value in and that formula in, and this is going to be, of course, a double. So essentially what this is, quite simply, just reading off the actual formula itself, is going to be a percentage, or rather you could say a variance here of known state sales divided by total known sales times our total unknown sales. So sort of like a weighted field right there. And we'll go ahead and do some cleanup of our state values here. So what this is going to be, this is just going to clean up the values of the actual state values inside of our data set. And I'll go ahead and I'll show you guys after running this what this actually does. Sort of a before and after here. And then I'll go ahead and create one last field, and this is going to create for us our total true sales. So total state sales. And that'll just be known state sales plus our apportioned unknown sales. So we'll go ahead and click on our double option because, of course, we are working with money. And then we can go ahead and move on here. So I'll go ahead and click on run just to show you guys what that cleanup field did. And if we take a look here, right, this state field, what we essentially did was taking a look at South Dakota, right, 43, record 43. Notice currently it has a space, so this is at the output. Looking at the feed into that tool, right, we had that dash here. Essentially all we're doing, just cleaning up that dash. So having said that, we can go ahead and finally take a look at our state tax fields or data set. We can now start to actually include that into our data stream. Now, in order to do so, what I'll go ahead and do is, again, utilizing a bit of a different method of adding in these values. I could absolutely utilize the join tool. However, in this case, you guys a bit of a different perspective of what you can and can't do in Alteryx, or rather, I should say, what you can do without the can't do. And we'll go ahead and utilize the find and replace field. So if I go ahead and drag that in, clicking on the find and then connecting up our state tax rates into the replace, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll place the entire field, find within states, find value states. So we're looking at states and states. Those are the two fields that we're utilizing for find within and find value. And then what we can go ahead and do is we're going to append the fields to record. So we're not actually going to be finding and replacing your state values, but rather you're going to be telling Alteryx, I want you to find the value found within the two state fields. And without replacing them, we're going to do something else. In this case, we're going to append the fields to records, which is going to be our state tax rates. So if I go ahead and click on run, we will be greeted with a beautiful output of our state tax rates, just as if we were going to utilize a join tool, right? A join tool is essentially just going to be a fancy VLOOKUP, a fancy append to a data set, right? This is essentially what our find and replace field is doing as well. So if I go ahead and click on the formula tool, going ahead and clicking and dragging the formula tool in, I'll go ahead and add in one last value here, state taxes, state tax rate times total state sales. So state tax rate again times our total state sales. And that's just going to show us how much our states have been taxed, or rather how much we made in each state compared to how much we owe in state taxes. So I'll go ahead and click over one more time, dragging in a select field. We can go ahead and clean up some values. So deselecting total known sales, we can go ahead and deselect no state sales, total unknown sales, and the apportioned unknown sales that we utilize in order to get those total sales here. So if I go ahead and click on run one more time, let's see that beautifully cleaned up data set here. And this is what we're working with. Now, again, still looks a bit odd in terms of how we've built out this data set. No worries. We'll go ahead and now actually move on to our last portion of this session, which is going to take us, have us take a look at the reporting tools. So if I go ahead and click on reporting, what I'll actually go ahead and do is drag in the basic table tool. So if I go ahead and, where are you? Yes, the basic table. Click and drag that in, and we're going to be leaving it at the basic mode, leaving the percentage table width. I'm going to show the column headings, and a neat thing that I actually learned quite late into my Alteryx career was the fact that you can actually add in, similar to how Excel can input thresholding, or you can have thresholding in Excel, you can absolutely create a column rule as well. So what I'll go ahead and do is add in a rule that says, let's say that if this value is larger than 100,000, right? We'll go ahead and say that when our total state sales is greater than 100,000, we'll go ahead and change the font to bold, and we'll change the background color to, let's do red. Cool. So we'll leave everything else as is. We don't necessarily need to do like any saving or anything, because if I go ahead and hit close, notice that that's already saved there. So we'll go ahead and leave that row rule in there. So it's a bit of a thresholding aspect here. I love it. Now, please keep in mind that as you guys are using these render tools or these reporting tools, right? If I go ahead and click on run, notice that I don't necessarily get an output here. So if I go ahead and click on the output for basic table, notice I need to utilize a browse tool in order to create a visual preview of what we're expecting. Now, I won't necessarily do that here in the essence of time. I won't necessarily add in all the browse tools, right? Because it's not even in a state where it's ready yet. However, just keep in mind that if you guys do want to be able to see that, that piecemeal development, you will need to be able to add in, or you will need to add in a browse tool. Cool. So the next step over is to create that header. So that essentially is going to give us, if I go ahead and click on here, right, that'll essentially give us this grid view. Now, of course, it's not entirely at that state yet, but to break it down, right, we've added in these values. We got that thresholding that's happening. Now let's go ahead and add in, for example, our Alteryx sales report header here. Because everything needs to be built. Alteryx is not going to automatically add those things in. So we do need to specify that. So I'll go ahead and, for example, create our text over here. So report text, I'll go ahead and add that in. Now, the special thing about this tool, don't necessarily need an input. It can purely just be in the text data here. So I'll go ahead and call this table. Notice that it specifies that it's going to be creating a new field, right? This isn't just some kind of floating amorphous concept in Alteryx, right? We're still going to have to ground it within the terms that Alteryx understands, which is, of course, fields. So I'll go ahead and paste this out. So that's just going to be Alteryx sales reports. Bold this, maybe put that down there. Now let's see. Don't know if we have our special tags here. So I'll go ahead and include a special tag, make it a horizontal line, right? And that'll give us our header here. So we have Alteryx sales reports and a fancy horizontal line. Now in the special tags, which is where I found it, you could absolutely add in other tags as well. Leave it as is. Keep it simple. So I'll go ahead and, for example, here's a quick tip. In order to join these up, we're actually going to be utilizing a union tool. However, beyond that, because Alteryx is going to be funneling in this information based off of the order in which you added in the union tool, right? I want the Alteryx sales report header to be on top, so I'll add it in first, and then stacked underneath, beneath it is going to be the basic table, and that's what we're going to be working with. Now, of course, we do need to adjust the layout just to fine tune things. We won't necessarily get too deep into the configurations here, but just know that this layout tool is going to allow you to control everything from where certain numbers are placed, where certain values are placed, to page layouts, as well as et cetera, to printing and stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and add that in. We'll go ahead and select all records combined and the orientation. Drag this out. So with our orientation, we don't necessarily want to stack things horizontally, right? Because we want our header to be on top. So what we'll select is the vertical with section breaks. The layout width, we're going to set this to automatic. We want Alteryx to be able to automatically handle the width of our paper size, right? The data field, we'll leave it as table. Alignment is going to be center. Fill color, nothing. Section name, nothing. We're going to leave everything as is. So I'll go ahead and click out of that. And we're coming up on our final three tools here, as we are also coming up on the last piece of our session here, which is going to add in, if I go ahead and jump back over to this report, notice that we have that automatically generated piece of text here, July 14th, 2020, which is today's dates. We're going to go ahead and add that in now. So if I go ahead here and add in, it looks a bit like a person. We'll go ahead and drag in and add in that report header. And we'll leave it as Alteryx reports. Now you could say, actually, let's do something different. Let's do tax report or something like that. We'll specify the date format. We'll do month DD, comma, YYYY. We could use a logo on our header. We could use any kind of image here. I would say that keep it simple, make it as small as possible so you don't detract away from the actual report itself. But if it's important to you guys, absolutely, you can specify a logo. If you don't want to use any logo, feel free to deselect it. I'll add it in, call it the Alteryx logo, and leave it as is. Now, for the configuration, the last step here, we're going to be adding in a footer here. So if you guys have any legal information that you want to add in, of course, this is an Alteryx workflow and Alteryx modules. So we'll go ahead and add in some Alteryx related information. And that'll be found in our report footer. It looks sort of like a header. So for our header tool and our footers, our foot tools here. Now the default is going to be the Alteryx sort of legal content here at the very bottom. You could absolutely change that to whatever you would like, but I'll leave it as is. And then finally, we're gonna need our render tool. Now our render tool is special in that you can almost think of it as a temporary output here. So this is gonna allow you to output to a specific file. Now, if you have a file in a file share, for example, a shared drive or OneDrive or what have you, maybe SharePoint, you can specify that we're gonna have this workflow update a report every single day or every single hour, or every single half day, whatever you prefer. Or you can just say, for example, for development purposes, I just want to be able to see a temporary PDF file. And what Alteryx will do is it will ingest, it'll work through, chunk everything out. You'll be able to view it just like any other PDF document. So the data field, we're going to select layout, leave it as is, header, right? We just created those headers. So we're going to click header and then we're going to click on footer, right? To add in those pieces of information, we're going to select show header and footer on first page. And I'll go ahead and leave it as is. We can also go ahead and take a look at our edit default styles if you wanted to. I'm going to leave everything as is, not necessarily needed. However, it's something you can absolutely do so if you wanted to. I'll go ahead and hit OK. Click on run. And finally, we'll go ahead and hit OK. Now, notice I still don't really necessarily get any output here. However, notice that I do have a link here found in my local data folder. If I go ahead and click on that link, we'll see, whoops, it's on the other side. We'll be able to see that data set here that we saw before. So we have all of our information here found in this document. So we have our data here. Cool. Now, you do have the option to do some adjustment if you see fit. However, I'll go ahead and leave it as is, that basic overview of the workflow here. Now, if you guys have any questions, absolutely feel free to chime in. I'll give it a minute or so for people to send anything in. And I'll go ahead and shut up here at the mic. So like we have too many questions, feel free to drop us a line if you guys do have any questions at any point. Go ahead and open up a notepad here at my email address. Or feel free to visit us at datameaning.com. Now, this is going to be our final session together, so a bit of sweet I guess goodbye. However, at any point, feel free to look us up on LinkedIn. We have a bunch of different sessions running concurrently. I'm not the only content producer or showcaser here at Data Meeting. We have content running every single week to hopefully make your quarantine life a bit cozier, a bit more fruitful if you guys want to learn other softwares. So feel free to join us on those. Having said that, thank you guys for joining us, and I'll talk to you guys next time, whenever that may be.